Do we finally have it? The smoking gun as to whether or not Ernest Hemingway was an ist or a phobe in short story form? Well, we'll talk about it. Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for another short story discussion. Pardon me, I almost said poetry discussion. We're here for another short story discussion that will take place in two separate playlists here on the channel. Number one being the short story discussion playlist, but number two being a short story by short story read along of Ernest Hemingway's Finca Vigia edition of Complete Short Stories. The complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway. The short story in question today is known as A Simple Enquiry. We will have a So What Happened recap of the story, a literary criticism section, and a writer's corner talking about all of the notes we can take from this short story as writers. So, what happened? 3 soldiers in the Italian army are stuck because of the snow. One of them is a major, another is his administrative assistant, Tanani. Finally, the major's orderly, Panine. The major is sunburned badly and applying olive oil to his face before deciding to turn in for the evening. He tells Tanani to finish the paperwork. Panine comes in with wood for the fire. Wood for the fire. And the major calls to him calls to Tanani to send Panine into his room. Panine goes into the room and asks if he has, and the major asks Panine if he has ever been in love with a woman. The major has been reading Panine's letters, but there are none to a woman. Panine claims that he has. Really, he has. He has been in love with a woman. The major says, "Are you sure you don't really want..." And then, to take it a little further, he asks if his great desire isn't really... Right? Panine claims he doesn't understand. The major says do not patronize him, then dismisses Panine, then wonders whether or not Panine was lying. So, what is the great big deal with this short story? Here's the real... Is it not olive oil? I have to look back now because I don't know if it was olive oil or just oil. Am I making up that it was olive oil? Was that a racist? Was that a racist assumption on my behalf that the Italian was putting olive oil on his skin? It just says oil. It just says oil. I may have made that up. If anyone is the ist, I guess it's me. So the big deal with this short story, yes. Here's the thing. There, obviously, the major is making sexual advances on Panine. The major is rebuffed. Maybe. Or maybe Panine really doesn't understand what it is that he's being asked. Regardless, the major does not carry through with trying to seduce Panine. And then he dismisses him and said, basically, the last quote here is, "The little devil," he thought, "I wonder if he lied to me." Basically, the sort of oomph behind that line is, yeah, but he wanted it, right? That's sort of the ethos behind those words. So, so there's a lot of consternation with Hemingway. Hemingway was an ist. Hemingway was a phobe. Was he not? Look, I mean, if we're going to be honest, probably yes. I mean, he was a man of his time, just like all the women of his time were women of his time, like anyone of any kind of his time was a kind of his time. Probably he was racist in some ways, not in others. Probably he was sexist in some ways, not in others. He seemed to be attracted, so he gets a lot of slack for being a womanizer, but if you look at the women to whom he was attracted, oftentimes they're very impressive people. So it's sort of always more difficult than not with Hemingway. The real argument with this short story is not so simple as that. Here's the real argument with this short story. Is Ernest Hemingway a phobe? Why could you say that with this short story? This short story, no one is creeped out by the Major, really, even though the Major is acting in a creepy way. The story isn't saying that the Major is uh, a bad guy, right? He's sending out an inquiry, a simple inquiry. He's just asking, and look, if no, no. In fact, Panine doesn't even have to tell him no. He just says, okay, I got it, bud. Go ahead, get out, get lost, scram. But here's the real crux of the matter. When you read this short story, what's the point? Hemingway wrote some of the most fantastic short stories, flash fictions. Really, Hemingway wrote some. If you were to pick up many of these texts that are meant for advanced college courses on literature, yada yada, Hemingway's got flash fiction in there where it takes other writers 40 pages to get going. The amount of stuff that he can cram into 100 words, phenomenal. So, why write this story that doesn't say anything unless it is used to say, look at the Italians and all of the gays in their army? What else is the point? I think there are things here that are literary and can be extracted from this short story. But if you're making an argument for Hemingway not being the greatest guy, look, there's ammo in that gun. There's shells in that 12 gauge. To say it's it's so hard to talk about because it's so sort of superfluous an idea, right? It's so tangential to what's going on. You're looking at a tangent of a tangent. The short story exists. The tangent off of the short story is the simple inquiry, and the tangent off of that is, now why would that be the point of a short story? Riddle me this. Why would that be the point of a short story? If that is the point of the short story, simply Hemingway to point at X, Y, and Z, then it comes across as phobic. I don't personally really think that is there. I think that the inquiry part, maybe the simple part, is really what we're supposed to be looking at. Now, I do want to ask this here. Moving on from that point. The Major asks Panine, have you ever been in love? And Panine says, how do you mean, Signor Maggiore? In love. With a girl. I have been with girls. I did not ask that. I asked if you have been in love with a girl. So we have here either we have the Major being more interested in the love part than the girl part, saying, look, if you're not in love with a girl at the moment, what's the deal? Have you tried this? You like vanilla ice cream, but have you tried chocolate? Just give it a try, right? Or you have Panine confusing the idea of love with the idea of having sex. I have been with girls. I didn't ask if you'd had sex with girls, Panine. I asked if you were in love. So we have that bit there. But the real crux of that exchange only comes up later when the major says, I bet that little devil lied to me. What part is the major asking whether or not Panine lied about? Does he think Panine lied to him about the girl part? As in, the major's pretty sure Panine is not straight? Or does the major think that Panine lied about the love part and having a woman part because he doesn't want to get talked into these acts? That's kind of what I think is going on there. And I think that the ambiguity is purposeful. I think that is the real literary twist to this short story. The heft of Hemingway, in my opinion, with this short story lies in the ambiguity between what it is that the major believes Panine had lied to him about. Because if you read this short story and so Hemingway, very good at leaving the ambiguity in his short stories purposeful, meaning there is a moment in that short story that you, the reader, will assume something, and that tells us about you, the reader. If you are reading this and you assume that the major thinks Panine lied to him about having a woman, you are on the side of believing that Panine is scared to be taken advantage of. If, however, you believe the major thinks Panine is lying about love, that he's in love. Okay, now I've talked myself out of it. I forgot where I was. If the major thinks Panine is lying about having a woman, okay, hold on. If the major thinks Panine is lying about being in love, then the major thinks that he could actually get Panine to perform sexual acts whether he's gay or not. If, however, the major thinks that Panine is lying to him about the girl part of that, then the major believes that regardless of what comes out of his mouth, Panine is gay. I can read this. I have the gaydar. You're lying to me about it being a woman. Maybe you're in love with someone. You're lying about it being a woman. I can read you. But if the major thinks that Panine is lying about being in love, then he thinks that Panine is trying to get out of the sexual act. I think I got that out right. Personal note. I wonder, I had a love of my life moment. I thought that I was in love with a woman and that she was the one and that we were going to get married, everything. And she told me she had to talk to me one day. I have to talk to you when you get off work. And I thought, we failed a test, right? Something like that. Instead, The surprise talk was, hey, I'm going to the military. Okay. My goal from that point forward was to help her get in the best shape that we could to get her to boot camp. She was very worried about that part of things. I was not going to let that be a concern of hers. Okay, fine, great. Man, I didn't know it would hit me as hard as it did until she was gone. I had 5, 6, 7 letters to send to her, and I just never did. I couldn't do it. I could not bring myself to do it. I could not force myself to send those letters. I wrote them, drafted them up, put them in better handwriting, just couldn't do it. And I wonder, in this short story, it had never occurred to me that perhaps that is a common thing. That people just can't sometimes, right? That it felt like I was being abandoned, right? I had never wondered whether or not that was a common occurrence until this read through of this short story. Now on to the writer's corner of things. Again, we are subjected here, as I'm looking through the first few lines of the short, I might just be racist. I don't think there's anything here saying that it is olive oil. I think that it just says oil, and okay, we're just going to pretend that never happened. Oil. um, as a writer, I think that it is important to keep in mind your reader's mind's eye. That oil that the major is rubbing all over his face. He stands up, takes the saucer. Where is it here? He stroked his nose very delicately between his fingers. We have talked in, I believe it was just the last short story discussion in this series, about the nose being a sexual object. So he's stroking his nose between his fingers. When he had finished, he stood up. He is erect now. Took the no, upright, erect. Let me go back. He stroked his nose very delicately between his fingers. When he had finished, he stood up, took the saucer of oil, and went back into the small room of the hut where he slept. Where's that oil going, and what's it going for? Now, we understand later in the short story that there are sexual implications. But I think that it is very important. So I think that Hemingway put that there for a reason. He wanted to prime the reader to be ready to see things in a sexual manner, because he doesn't outright say anything sexual in the short story. The most explicit we get is the major saying, "And you don't really want?" The major paused. Pinin looked at the floor. Panine looked at the floor. "That your great desire isn't really?" Panine looked at the floor. Right? I think he touches his leg at one point or something, but that's the closest we get to anything that is sexual in nature. That little bit of oil, we watch that going with him into his room for this reason. The next comment I have here is the name confusion with this short story. Am I the only one that was lost with that? Hemingway does I think this is on purpose, but Hemingway does a bad job of letting us know his characters' names. I think that what that does for Hemingway is that for Hemingway, he knows when you're reading this a second time, you will understand that some bit of dialogue did not come from the character you thought it came from, and all of a sudden that's a different short story experience for you. I don't know if we can get away with that. We're not Hemingway. And the final writer's corner note that I have is this. What a journey for the Major through this short story. The Major goes from being sympathetic, he's all sunburned, and we see this. We have sympathy for him because he's obviously struggling, to understandable, look, but I'm just too tired for this. You're going to have to get this work done. To creepy, you sure you don't want, huh? 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 And then to amusing scoundrel, when he's sitting there on his bed thinking that SOB, I bet he lied to me. That entire character journey happens in 3 pages. That entire character journey, I mean, what is this? Probably 800 words tops? That entire character journey, just like that. If you can pull that off with your characters, you have done a something. That is all I have for this short story discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.